This week on Revolution Against Evolution, answering common arguments against creation. Also, Doug's singing giraffes. Is a special nerve located in the giraffe's neck a good design? Then, Derek Marshall takes us back to day 5 of creation in his Chemistry of God series. Welcome to the Revolution!
Welcome to Revolution Against Evolution. I'm Derek Marshall, your host.
And I'm Doug Sharp, co-host tonight.
Role reversal.
A little bit.
Usually I was waiting to see if he was going to be in this chair, but today I get to sit in the big chair, which is really good. Today we're going to be answering some common arguments people have against the Bible or the Word of God or the things that they hear in general about it. And there's a lot of evidence out there, but for evidence to be regarded as fact, it's got to be observable, testable, and repeatable, or else it's just not scientific. It has to stand up to the scientific method. And we're finding a lot of the questions and or answers that we get when it comes to different facts and stories in the Bible, just a lot of the questions, they're not exactly informed questions, and maybe they don't really understand the answer, but a lot of them come from positions of ignorance, and that's where we come in. We try to educate the people of what the Bible and the science actually says. And we have a really good show for you today. We're going to start out with a little explanation of our topic here. We have a really interesting creation or barrage that Doug likes to put on. This one is called, I think, Singing Giraffes.
Yeah.
Something similar to that.
It's about getting a giraffe to sing. The giraffe that sings. A while ago, a fellow asked us in an email why in the giraffe a nerve descends all the way to the bottom of the neck and goes up to the other side to the larynx. Isn't that evidence that God is a poor designer? I replied, when you wire a house, do you go around the walls or do you send it the most direct route diagonally across the room? Apparently, you must be a much better designer than God, so I'll give you an experiment. Go into the giraffe and surgically shorten the left recurrent laryngeal nerve. Perhaps then the giraffe would be able to sing. Speculating on how you could design something better than God is arrogant and quite foolish. And so the point of this is that you can make up a lot of stories or ask a lot of questions about whether something is, if God is able to do something a little bit differently than what you expect it to be. But that's it's what's called Teleology. It's a argument against God because he really didn't do it the way that you as a superior mind think it should have been.
Well, we had lots of arguments against animals or about examples of animals, and that's one. But there's some really general arguments that are like the favorite arguments that we hear people say towards or for evolution. And that's one of them is survival of the fittest. That one always kind of cracks me up.
Yeah. And how do you define that or experimentally verify that's why things came about? Because you have things survive because they don't die.
Right.
It's almost as if though they're using death as a mechanism to improve life, and that's not really the case at all. We're finding out that extinction is really something that is negative towards life.
Right. One of the examples they use is predation. How the death of animals or the population control of animals is done via predation. Whereas, is it the sick, lame animals, are those the ones that are chosen to die or to become food? Or is it the healthy animals? And we're finding it's not necessarily always the sick, the lame, and the lazy animals that get it. So that's one that's one example. Another example, mate selection. Mm-hmm. Now, what are the criteria of mate selection as far as animals go? Now, we know that some animals they give and they make presentations, really, really fancy presentations, like birds like to have their feathers out and that type of thing. They make these big displays to attract their mate. But what are the other criteria? For example, human beings. I mean, do we always go for the most healthy, viable potential mate, or do we go for someone that's more like us? So there's as far as the criteria goes for even mate selection, predation, it's unclear. So the survival of the fittest just is not really scientifically testable. We may see some examples of both arguments on that one.
The peacock comes to mind with that. You have all these elaborate feathers with the peacock, and supposedly that came about by mate selection. All right, we have the more attractive males doing this little dance, and that is what's caused all these feathers to appear.
Right. So the ones that had the most beautiful feathers, those are the ones that tend to survive on. The ones that not so. So did the first bird with the feathers, was that the most beautiful bird that ever existed? And then after that, or did a bird just do a dance, and then the prettier as the dances and as the birds died, more and more the feathers got prettier and prettier, and they became more and more attractive. It's kind of unclear to me which way that would work or what that could work. Another favorite one: where did Cain get his wife? Who's Cain's wife?
And that's something that has been a cause of racism down through the years. We've had this preached from the pulpit that the black race was the race of Cain, and then but that really doesn't work, because then you have another bottleneck at the time of Noah. Okay, well then they have to. The argument is then that Ham, Shem, and Japheth were the different races, and it's pretty much borne out that really isn't the case. It's those three had to intermarry in order to produce the different populations, and where they spread out after the dispersion was where you had some interbreeding, where certain traits got fixated in the population. But
so this idea that Shem was white, Ham was black, and Japheth was Oriental,
that's nonsense.
We're talking about three people. I mean, we were talking about three human beings. There's no race involved. We're not talking about race, because we're finding actually skin color is more related to where you happen to be, geography.
Right, yeah.
So if you're down by the equator, your skin's going to tend to be a little darker. If you're away from the equator, your skin may be a little bit lighter, simply because of the sun.
And the melanin in the skin is a protective thing against the sun, so it's something that is very helpful. And
just a little tidbit about Cain. So he's a very kind of mystical guy, this Cain. His genealogy is like a parallel genealogy as Seth's genealogy. But Seth's genealogy, they give how many years each step between each progeny, whereas with Cain's, they don't give that information. So that's always been an interesting tidbit to me.
Yeah, and of course, so the answer to where did Cain get his wife, it's obviously he married one of his sisters, or descendants of one of his sisters, because they lived hundreds of years, 900 years or more, and even though Cain received the curse after killing Abel, he was actually sent out, and he was actually protected by God. Yeah, so it's kind of interesting.
Right. Yeah, that's why I was saying he's a kind of a mystical guy, a little bit, a person that's left the presence of God after he had a mark cast on him. Also, another common argument is the sanctity of life. There's the idea of limiting births for for whatever reason we would want to limit or control births. One idea is competition for resources. If we have too many people competing for resources, that there's not going to be enough, and I just don't think that's
that's the population bomb problem. Right. You had that scare during the 70s and the 80s where we're out competing our resources, and we still have that with all the climate change and the other things with the environment that and so it's a reason that people give for abortions and for limiting their marriage and doing the things that will increase the population of the world. We have entire nations that are really losing their identity because they're only having one, or they're not even having kids. That's and they're sort of feeling that in China right now with the one-child philosophy that they had for many years, and now as they're finding out that it's a big problem. So
got to be careful too. I mean, I don't think we're quite at the point where we have designer babies yet, but arbitrarily choosing which child lives, which child dies, even before they're born. There is a balance that's innate with that God has put into the design, of that we get basically 50% women, girls, 50% boys. And if you start arbitrarily changing or deciding what kid is going to live, you're going to offset that balance. That balance is going to be upset, and you're going to have more of one than the other, which I don't think is necessarily an optimal balance. Now we have some arguments about animals. Questions arising from fossils we found and different types of kinds that we've developed from these fossils. One being the existence of teeth or claws or inconvenient animals or mosquitoes and gnats. Why do we have those when they don't? All they seem to be is negative or against us or harmful to us. If God created all the animals, why did He create these boring animals that sting us, that bore into our eyeballs, that chew holes in us? A lot of those animals really do serve a function in nature, being food for other animals, and also animals form coexistence, and they have form cooperations. Whereas you would have a large animal that has a lot of flies around it, and then you'll have another animal that eats or picks off the flies. I think that's a cooperative relationship that happens between some animals.
Things like flies and things they eat the carcasses of dead animals, and so they have a function.
Right.
Oftentimes that function is a little bit skewed sometimes, and that's part of the curse that happened with the fall of man.
Right.
And so we have to understand that we're not living in the perfect world that was originally created by God. We are in a world that was tainted by the fall of man, and everything that we see that is bad is under the influence of when man gave the authority over the devil to do something different than what God had intended. And so
I see this as a picture of sin. We sit in the garden that caused the fall. Sin is missing the mark. And when you miss the mark, you are occupying territory that doesn't belong to you or that you shouldn't be in. That's what sin does. And these stinging animals are occupying their stingers going into my body, which is not the right place to go. And that's so these anything with teeth, the claws, the gnats, all of these are animals that offend us and offend our space. And that's actually a picture of sin. What about all the little the horses, the evolution of horses, Doug? We have the little Eohippus and all the. I grew up with this. I had a little science book that showed all the little horses all the way up to the modern horse. A lot of these horses are, actually, all different types of sizes of horses actually exist in the here and now.
Well, that's right,
today.
yeah. I have a little cartoon in my book, the horse evolution is horse feathers. Because in certain parts of the world, you find that the fossil sequence is opposite of what you expect from evolution, because you have it going the other way in this different layers, and so
plus you have different numbers of ribs that are jumping up and down, and it just doesn't make any sense as far as any sort of evolutionary progression. It doesn't really follow a consistency. It's more. Plus, all these fossils are found, like you said, all over the world. How can you show any sort of interconnection between all these fossils when they're just found all over the place?
Right, and so it's a argument that really doesn't hold up, and it has a better explanation from the perspective of creation from God, which is similar to that of homology, which is the idea that you have all these different animals that have these same characteristics. That shows common descent according to evolution. If you have a computer programmer, what he will do is use sections of code in various applications all throughout his systems that he designs. God, when he designed the creation, he designed different systems that do certain functions, and you have, for example, let's say a dolphin. Dolphins are designed to be aerodynamic, water dynamic, to be able to flow through the water, but you don't see wings on them where they fly. They're not designed to do that. They're designed for the environment that they're in. But it has characteristics of a mammal because it gives live birth, and so it suckles its young, and just like a mammal. And so, but it's got the nose is at the top of its head. How did that work? You've got to figure that out, Mr. Evolutionist, how the dolphin got his nose to the top of his head. So that's it's a different interpretation of the evidence that we have before us, and we as creationists have a great interpretation for what we see before us, and that's what we're trying to do, is to remove obstacles for faith.
Right. What about the missing link, Archaeopteryx? This is a bird or a dinosaur bird, or we believe that birds, or not we believe, but it's believed that birds came from dinosaurs. This is kind of like the missing link between modern birds and the dinosaurs. A lot of people, originally the birds, those bones were thought to be hollow, but they're actually, or solid, but they're actually hollow, like a regular bird's bones are. And teeth. There's modern animals and birds that have teeth. I think there's a few species of geese that have teeth.
Yeah, the gray-legged goose has got the serrated bill, and so but they're birds, and
Right.
and there's one that's called a Watsine, which has actually has claws on the wings.
Right. Yeah.
And so there's a lot of different things, and it's just a different variety of characteristics that God and his creative power had in his bag when he was doing his creation. And he took that section of code and put it over here and put it over here and put it over here and made these animals similar because he is the creator, he is a designer, and that's what he does. But if you but they also have something they call convergent evolution, where you have two entirely different species, but they're almost identical. But they live in different parts of the world, and they
Right.
have completely different DNA behind it.
Right.
Yet they have the same design like that. So it's
Yeah.
like birds and bats and insects and pterodactyls and flying fish. They all have some design that are similar, and yet they would have had to have that evolution happen 4 different times or 5 different times in order to produce that stuff. So
Plus, we want to make the distinction between microevolution and macroevolution. Macroevolution being molecules to man type of thing. It's one species or one kind of animal turning into another kind, which we absolutely do not believe. But we have, for example, peppered moths that existed during the Industrial Revolution. We found that before the Industrial Revolution, these moths were whiter, and as the Industrial Revolution, the soot and what have you gathered around, these moths tended to blend in more with the soot and become darker. And they thought that was, evidence for evolution, which is absolutely not. I mean, God has put variation and the ability for a species to adapt to its environment. That's inherent in the design. Well, that's our show. We're sure glad that you joined us tonight, and we hope that you see us again on Revolution Against Evolution. It's Creation Day 5, creation of birds, fish, and moving creatures. Genesis 1:20 through 21 says, "And God said, Let the waters bring forth abundantly the moving creature that hath life, and fowl that may fly above the earth in the open firmament of heaven. And God created great whales, and every living creature that moveth, which the waters brought forth abundantly, after their kind, and every winged fowl after his kind. And God saw that it was good." Creation Day 5 notes. God makes a distinction. These creatures came from the waters. He created an abundance of winged fowl and birds, as we see. He also created living, moving creatures. Class Amphibia, which is what we know as amphibians. Among these is Order Anura, which is the frogs and toads. Order Urodela, which are salamanders and mud puppies. Order Apida, which means no foot. The African Sicilian, which is snake-like creature. He also created the great whales. We know whales as mammals, and could not have evolved because mammals came from the earth, from dry land, and according to evolutionists, went back into the water. But as we see in the creation, the progression of creation, that just isn't the way it is. God created after its kind. Animals did not evolve from other animals, and God stipulates this. Creation was good, each step. These animals lived in harmony during active creation. We bring forth the harmonic series equation, which is the formalized version of the creation function. That's the summation that's at the top of the page. Harmony exists in nature, and that's an example of design. The harmonic series equation also produces a logarithmic spiral pattern. As we've heard before and said before, 7
rotations of creation is like 7-day creation, which is 7 rotations of the Earth. This numerical sequence obtained correlates to the Fibonacci series and the periodic table. The creation function, night 5. God is continuing to add to his creation. The creation spiral is actually a fractal pattern. That is why I'm able to continue using the same style graphic showing the spiral, because even though the spiral has grown, it's maintained its proportion. Night 5 is root 83 of the creation function to root 136. If we take range root 83 to root 137, we obtain the number 55, which is a Fibonacci number. Night 4 and night 5 is from the firmament. That was created on day 2. Root day 2 ended at root 10. Correspondingly, the periodic table period 4 and 5 begin the d orbitals, which provide occupancies for 10 electrons. Day 5 is really when we begin to see the Fibonacci ratio and golden ratios patterns develop. Creation function day 5. Day 5 goes from root creation function root 137 to root 226. The fine structure constant, which is an important fundamental constant in physics, it has the value 1/137th. Night 5's creation function range, if taken from 83 to 136, equals 54. The day 5 range, taken from root 137 to root 226, equals 90. Therefore, the entirety of day 5 of creation equals 144 root, and that is a Fibonacci number. Day 5 of creation also exhibits golden ratios, otherwise known as phi, one which carries the value 1.617. The ratio of night and day 5 ranges, 90 divided by 54, is 1.67, which is a close approximation to the golden ratio. Also, day 5 of creation is exponential, which we know E carries the value of approximately 2.718. If you take the root night and day 5 totals, being 227 root divided by 83 root, you get 2.735, which is a close approximation to E. We see that animals exhibit these golden and Fibonacci proportions. We see Fibonacci sequence from the atomic to the astronomical. Above you see the entire set, or a good portion of the set of Fibonacci numbers, where you take two numbers, add them together, and you get the third number. And that's how you develop this sequence. We see this proportion of the golden ratio in the nautilus shell pattern, which would be a day 5 animal. DNA spiral, just a single term, has a ratio of 21 to 34 angstroms, which is a measure of an atomic level measurement. The sunflower exhibits a triple spiral pattern. Smaller sunflowers have the 21, 34, 55 spiral ratios. The larger sunflowers have the 34 to 55 to 89 spiral ratios, which are all Fibonacci ratios. This spiral growth of animals keeps the proper proportion as an animal or a organism grows. Creation must have had a number system that is compatible to the Fibonacci series, and we see that with the creation function. We see Fibonacci ratios from plants to planets. Did you know that the same ratios that exist on how leaves are positioned on a stem or a branch is the same ratio as the distance planets are, or the orbital time period of planets around the sun? The fraction of the circle between adjacent leaves on a stem, taken with the angle between the adjacent leaves, gives a periodicity of the leaves. Plant examples include elm and lime and linden mulberry trees. And also, corresponding with these same ratios, we have planetary
orbits around the sun. And these ratios are the same ratios as those around the stems of trees. And with these exhibits, we know that God created the heavens